Hi, welcome to my kitchen. It's me, Felicia, and today we're going to be talking about one of the basic building blocks of the plant-based diet. What is it? It's veggie broth. So here I am with what looks like a mess in front of me, right? But it's not. You see, all of these pieces, all of these things that you see in front of me, a lot of people, maybe even you, have been getting rid of. You've put them down your garbage disposal, you've put it out in the compost bin, but guess what? I'm here to tell you that these scraps, these odds and ends that you cook with, can be made into the most beautiful, delicious veggie broth. And you'll never have to buy veggie broth at the grocery store ever again. I know, that's a crazy claim, right? But guess what? If you're cooking whole food plant-based, then you're always cooking things like celery, which is what I have the ends of here. You're always using things like onions. I mean, I don't know of a soup or a stew or a lot of my meals that don't start with onions. So you've got all of these odds and ends. Save them in bags. These are just the regular grocery bags from the produce department at the grocery store. Sometimes I will save just a kind of a produce bag or another bag, and I throw them in my freezer. And it's interesting because the ratio of how many bags of odds and ends I have in my freezer to how much broth I have in my freezer are, what do you say? They're not related. They're inversely related. That's what I want to say. They're inversely related. So what do I mean? I mean that when my freezer is full of broth, I don't have any of these bags because I just use the bags, the odds and ends in the bags to make my broth. And then once my broth starts to run low, well, I have been cooking all that time and saving my odds and ends. So when my freezer gets full of odds and ends, I know it's time to make more broth. So that's what we're doing today. This could not be easier. All right, you just take your odds and ends. And in here, this was a big piece of bok choy, and this is the end of that. I've got these were collard greens and kind of the stems of those, or kale. I'm not sure what they are. Either way, I've got some carrot pieces in there. I've got in here, I'm seeing a yellow bell pepper. So this is just the stem and the seeds from the yellow bell pepper. So anything that you'd be throwing out, the papery parts of, happens to be a red onion, the blossom and stem ends, or the root ends of the onions all go in there. The pieces of celery that you cut off from the bottom. And you just dump it all into a big stock pot. Now here's the thing. If you don't have a big giant stock pot, then you'll just make broth a little bit more frequently. Use a smaller pot. If you don't want to make a whole bunch and stick it in your freezer feels like it's always full, then just make a little bit at a time. All right, but this veggie broth is something that you are going to use all the time. These are cabbage cores, so just when I cut out and core the cabbage, you can't eat that. What are you going to do with it? Make broth. That's what you're going to do. So you just dump everything into your big, giant stock pot, or small stock pot, or medium-sized stock pot, whatever you have, it doesn't matter. And then I save these bags. They don't have to go in the landfill or somewhere else. I just save them and I put them underneath in a drawer or in a cabinet, and I refill them with odds and ends. So when you've seen me cook, you may have seen me cook with what I call my veggie broth bowl. And I just chop up my odds and ends, throw them in the bowl, and then when I'm done, when I clean up, it couldn't be easier. I open my freezer, I pull out one of the bags, dump them in, and then I know I've got broth that will be coming at any moment. So that's all I do. So what else do I have in here just to show you? I have These are, oh, so I got some carrots and they had the greens on the carrots. Yes, you can eat the greens of carrots, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do with them. I didn't have a plan for them, and they don't stay very long, especially after you've eaten the carrots. So I thought, you know what, veggie broth, that's what they're going to be. So all of that is in here. This is butternut squash peelings you could put in there along with the butternut squash core, like the seeds and all that stuff. I've got collard greens that kind of started to get that funky color. Any of your greens, you know, when you buy greens and you think you're going to use all of these greens, and then for whatever reason you don't use all of them, and they kind of start to get a little wilty and they start to get a little, you know, discolored and maybe a little yellow. Well, put them in your freezer before they go bad and get all slimy and yucky. Once they're slimy and yucky, you don't want to make broth out of them. So put them in the freezer before they go bad. But when they're past eating in a fresh salad, you know what I'm saying, right? Put them in there, and all we're going to do now is just fill this with water. And once we fill this with water, we're going to put it on the stove, and it's just going to boil for maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours. It doesn't take that long because it's veggies to extract the delicious nutrients and goodness, and we're going to turn our water into liquid gold. As you can see here, I've started to fill up the pot, and as the pot fills, I'm able to see that, you know what, there's some more that can fit. So I'm just pouring in a little bit more as I go and pushing it down so it fits into the pot. Okay, so you just saw me fill this to the top with water. And in fact, it wasn't actually totally filled. So I had another bag of veggies in there. I had some of these carrots that my daughter had that she took to school, and then she kept them in her lunchbox, and they kind of got a little funky. You know what I'm saying? Like she didn't finish all of the carrots that I gave her. And so I thought, well, nobody's going to want to eat those. So into the freezer they went, and now they're in here because they're fine. The nutrients are still in there. They just were a little bit not appetizing, if you know what I'm saying, right? So I filled it all the way to the top with all of the veggies, pushed them down in with my water. I'm just going to put a lid on this, and then I'm going to use my muscles, and I'm going to move this over. Whoop, it's heavy, to my stove. Here we go. And I'm going to put it on my boil. So this is my boiling burner on my stove. And so that's it. One thing I want you to notice I did not put in. I did not put in any salt. I do not salt my broth for a couple of reasons. Number one is I'm trying to eliminate as much salt as possible. I minimize it in my diet. So if you're salting the broth and you put that salted broth in the food, you're not in control of exactly how much salt or sodium you're putting into your food. I don't like to do that. So occasionally, depending on what it is that I'm eating, maybe I'll put a little tiny bit of salt in something when I'm cooking it if I feel like it's really going to need it. But usually I just leave salt on the table, and anybody in my family who wants to use it can put a little bit. That's where you taste the salt anyway. It's right there on the tip of your tongue. And so you don't necessarily need to be using salt all of the time in everything that you do. Yes, sodium is a naturally occurring mineral. Yes, we need sodium in our bodies for our bodies to be able to function properly. But there's sodium that naturally occurs in plant foods. We will get plenty of sodium, I promise you, by eating whole food plant foods. You don't need to be adding tons of salt to stuff. So you don't need salt in there. You don't need any extra herbs because there's so much flavor coming from all of the scraps. And I also have some herb scraps in there. So the stems of parsley, you know, those are pretty tough and woody and really not delicious to eat. So unless you're grinding them up into some kind of a pesto, a parsley pesto or something, ooh, that sounds like a good idea. Maybe we'll make a parsley pesto on this channel. We'll see how that comes out. But unless you're grinding them up or something like that, what are you going to do with those stems? Well, most people throw them in a compost, which is a great reuse of them. But if you don't have a compost bin, they're probably going in the garbage or down the garbage disposal. And so why not save them, put them in the freezer, and then you'll have parsley in your veggie broth, which is great, right? So again, any kind of leaves, stems, odds, ends, skins. When you peel a potato, I don't always peel my potatoes, but when I do, they end up in the veggie broth bowl. That goes into the veggie broth freezer. That goes into the veggie broth stock pot. That becomes veggie broth. So I've got it covered. It's going to take a little while for this big pot to come to a boil. And then once it does come to a boil, I'll lower the temperature and just let it bubble away for about an hour, like I said, maybe 2. And at the end of that time, I will have amazing broth, and I'll come back and we will strain it off together so you can see the process of straining it off, which honestly is the hardest part of the whole thing. Hardest. It's not hard to strain broth. So I'll show you that in just a little bit. In the meantime, while you wait, make sure if you're new to this channel, I want to say first of all, welcome, but make sure that you subscribe. So click that little bell icon so that you are notified of any new videos that I place here. Well, here we are. The broth is now finished. Ooh, and it's still hot. So I am going to use my pot holders and get this back over. It's still heavy. All right, so normally I would wait for this to cool down a bit more, but I wanted to make sure I got this video finished for you today. So I'm going to take a photo so you can see what it looks like inside the pot a little bit close up, but that's what it looks like from far away. Here it is, ready and done. And notice the vegetables are not very bright in color anymore, which is exactly what you want. Okay, so one thing you want to be looking for, the question might be, well, how long do you boil the vegetables for? Well, first thing you got to do is you got to get your pot, bring it all the way up to the boil, right? Then lid on, leave the lid on the whole time from cold water to done. Just leave that lid on. Otherwise, all of that broth will start to evaporate and cook down, and we don't want that. We just need broth. We don't need something like super thick like a stock. So once you do that, then you're just kind of keeping an eye on the vegetables, and you're looking for them to turn that kind of grayish color. And that's how you know the nutrients have left the vegetables and entered the broth, which is what we will be enjoying with our soups, with our stews, to use for sauteing, whatever. And it is fantastic. So what I'm doing now is really the hardest part. And I'm just going to start straining this broth. And the reason that I'm using the ladle right now is because this is a very heavy pot, and it's still hot broth. You could see the steam probably still coming off of it. And so I'm just taking ladles full and I'm straining them through my fine mesh strainer into a bowl here. And then I've got this other bowl off to the side here, and I'm just going to put my pieces that I have strained right into that bowl. And this is the longest, kind of hardest, which isn't really hard, part of the whole process, is just getting these veggies that were in here. See, they don't look good anymore. That's what we want. They've given up all of their goodness to our delicious broth. And so I'm just draining them into the bowl. And that's going to be that. And another way you know that for sure they're done, whenever you touch something, so you can see this was a butternut squash, the top of a butternut squash. You see that? It's squishy. It's squishy. So when your veggies are all squishy and they literally break apart when you touch them with a fork, absolutely it's done. Another indication that it's done, look at this liquid gold color. That's what you're going for, is that liquid gold color. Ooh, yeah. So once you see your broth has turned that delicious color, your veggies have kind of gone gray. You know when you blanch veggies and you put them in and right away they turn this beautiful bright color, like I'm looking at the broccoli stalks right now. You put in broccoli in hot, whatever it is, hot broth or hot water, and you blanch them and they get really vibrant and beautiful really quickly. Okay, so that's fantastic. We are going way past that, way past that. So in the beginning, your vegetables are going to be like, wow, they look so good. And then as they cook and they cook and they cook and they cook, an hour, maybe two, on low, once you bring it to the boil, they'll start to look less appetizing. That's actually exactly what we want, because we're going to just press out any liquid that's in them. See that liquid that's in there? That's why I'm going through this trouble of straining them, so that I get every last drop of this liquid gold and be able to put it into my soups, into my stews, and everything else. I make grains with this. So anytime I make rice, as long as it's not going to be rice for a dessert, for example, but anytime I make rice or any other kinds of grains that's a savory application, I use this broth. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I use it. It's just a staple in my kitchen. All right. So you're going to watch, and hopefully it's all going to be fine, because I got my microphone here. I got you over there high. And I have this big, giant, heavy pot. All right. Wish me luck. Here we go. There we go. It's working. All right. So I am going to continue straining this, but just so you can kind of see what the process looks like. And then I'm going to just drain this here. And I'm going to put it right in there. Get this out of the way so that you can see the next step is I just have these freezer containers, and I have some large ones. I have some kind of smaller size ones, and I have been reusing these same containers for years. So I love them. And the small ones are great for smaller things, like if I'm making rice, for example. This is enough broth in here for making one recipe of rice or quinoa or farro, maybe depending, for my family. So this is perfect for one serving. The bigger one is perfect for when I want to make soup or stew or something like that. So I made butternut squash soup the other day, and my butternut squash soup used just about one full of these containers. So it was just the perfect size. So whatever kind of containers work for you, I like these because they can come in and out of the freezer. When they come out of the freezer, I don't always, I'm just going to set this out of the way. When it comes out of the freezer, I don't always plan far enough in advance to say, oh, I'm going to take the broth out at the beginning of the day. So I like something that I can take from the freezer, take the lid off, pop it in the microwave so it defrosts. So I'm just going to put this out of the way so that it cools. I don't want to put it in my freezer immediately because it'll drop the temperature of my freezer. And that is not a good thing. So I just keep straining this or draining into the containers. Now there is something that I want to point out to you that you might be able to see from your angle. Can you kind of see in there? There's a little bit of sediment at the bottom. So that's from just little pieces of things. Oops, I went a little bit high on that, a little bit heavy. I got to be careful. You don't want to overfill these. Oh, that was almost perfect. Almost perfect. You don't want to overfill your containers because then when you put the lids on, liquid ends up all over the counter and it's just messy. So I try to make a perfect pour every time. All right, get that out of the way. So there's some sediment here that's kind of in the bottom, and that's, vegetables, right? I mean, they grow in soil. So there's a little bit of bits of sediment. I just drain that off. There it is. Drain it off. And then you will have occasionally some sediment build up in your containers. So when you defrost them, don't be alarmed if you see something kind of floating toward the bottom or whatever. It's just the sediment from the vegetables. It's absolutely normal. Just use the broth, and then you can decide if you want to strain it with a cheesecloth and strain it even more, or, hang on, I'm stronger from the other side. Do you have a stronger side? I know, I do too. All right, so I'm going to use this side. It's a little bit less awkward for me to do it from this side with this big, giant, heavy pot. As I was saying, you just want to be careful with that sediment. It's not going to hurt anything. It's just not going to be perfectly delicious. So remember, this broth is no sodium. There's no added salt in this broth. So that is fantastic. That means you have total control over each recipe that you make with it, of how much salt or sodium you're going to put in, if or none. And you don't have to use it. Absolutely, you don't have to. Your taste buds will become accustomed to tasting food as it is, and not with all that extra salt and so forth. But if you want to use salt, it's your kitchen. You do what you like to do. How's that sound? All right. I like to put salt. I just put the salt on the table, and that's that. So, as I said, I'm just going to continue to fill my containers here, set them off to the side, and then I will freeze them. And I'm going to have broth now for the next, how much will this make me? Probably enough for 2 weeks, I'd say. So that's what I have for you today. It is the easiest ever homemade vegetable broth. And easy because you don't have to run to the store. You're never going to have to buy it. It's free. Who doesn't love free? I love it. And you know exactly what's in it. And it's economical, but it's also ecological. It's good, better for the environment. If you're using this stuff, right, you've already paid for all of these little odds and ends. So why not use them? That's what I'm saying. So make your own homemade veggie broth. Couldn't be easier. It's absolutely delicious when you put it in stuff. Right now, it's not going to taste like a whole lot. You know why? Because there's no seasoning in it. It's just beautiful, plain broth. Okay, so let's give this a quick taste before I put it away, just so that you can see. Oh, that color. I love it. And depending on the vegetables that you use, the color will be more or less vibrant, but it's usually this beautiful kind of golden color. You know, if you're using maybe the ends of a red beet, it might have a little more red tint to it, for example. All right, let's see. Oh my gosh. It is so good. Because there's no seasoning in there, there's no salt in there, it's just this pure, unadulterated, just veggie flavor. It's so, so good. And you're going to be so happy when you use this veggie broth in all of your recipes. Thanks so much. Make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Are you still here? Yep, I'm just taking my time, spooning this out. We're getting down to the end now.